You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the evacuation of Boston, which took place on March 17, 1776. After the Americans occupied Dorchester Heights, the British knew they had to leave Boston. General Howe had planned to move to New York City in the spring. The problem was Washington and the Continental Army had pushed up Howe's timeline. His reinforcements from London were not there yet, and he didn't want to take his relatively small force to New York. Part of the Continental Army, along with New York militia, was already building defenses around the city. The last thing Howe wanted to do was land his relatively small force and possibly face an attack under possibly worse circumstances than the one he was leaving. Howe wanted to invade with an overwhelming force there to make sure that they could overcome any resistance. That couldn't happen for a few more months, so by March 7th, Howe made the decision to evacuate to Halifax until he could collect all the forces he needed to attack New York. This evacuation would not be easy. There were over 8,000 soldiers in Boston. Some sources say nearly 9,000, about a quarter of whom were sick. There were also an estimated 2,400 camp followers. These are wives and children of the soldiers who could not be left behind. Some say the records of camp followers were smaller, but this is because records only exist for about half of the regiments that were being evacuated. In addition, there were more than 1,100 Tory colonists who could not be left behind to face Patriot vengeance. In total, Howe had to board an estimated 12,000 people, along with all their belongings, aboard ship under enemy fire, all the time worried that the Patriots might attack while the regulars were in the process of evacuating. The British had about 125 ships at their disposal, enough to carry all the people, though there was an uncomfortable amount of crowding aboard ships. There was also not enough room for all the equipment, supplies, and personal effects of the colonists that they were trying to move with the army. Even worse, the Navy had been losing sailors to disease and desertion all winter. They did not have enough sailors to man all the ships they had at their disposal. They ended up destroying several ships that they could not take with them. In an attempt to make the evacuation easier, Howe sent out a notice to the Patriots on March 9th, declaring that the British had in fact decided to evacuate Boston. If the rebels fired on them while they were evacuating, then they would burn the city. If they were left alone, they would leave the city intact and allow the Continentals to take control. While General Howe had agreed not to burn Boston, he also did not want to leave anything of use in the city that could be used by the enemy to further their rebellion. Howe ordered the citizens to turn over all their woolens and linens. These were apparently in short supply in the Continental Army, but would also probably be needed when the regulars arrived in Halifax. Later, he extended the order to salt, sugar, flour, furniture, and any remaining weapons. Soldiers looted houses looking for such goods and taking whatever else of value they happened to find. Howe had orders that looters would be shot on sight, but that didn't happen. No one in the army was in much mood to fight about protecting colonist property. On March 16th, Howe ordered all Boston civilians not leaving with the fleet to remain confined to their homes to ensure the soldiers would not have any problems and to keep the streets free for the military. On the morning of March 17th, they completed boarding the ships and sailed out of Boston Harbor for the last time. As the fleet moved away, the Continental Army moved into the city. General Washington gave the honor of retaking the city to Generals Ward and Putnam, both New Englanders who had been at the siege since it began 11 months earlier, when the militia chased the regulars from Lexington and Concord back into Boston. Ward and Putnam took a select force of about 1,000 soldiers into the city. All of the soldiers selected had already survived smallpox and therefore were immune from that disease, which was still ravaging Boston. Washington himself entered the city a few days later to take command. While the British had looted most houses, Washington was pleased to report to John Hancock that his mansion was surprisingly intact. General Clinton had lived in Hancock's house during much of the occupation and had made an effort to protect the personal items of his unwilling host. Washington also took note of the defenses that the regulars had built through the city and realized that if he had attacked by water, as he had planned earlier, his men would have run into almost impregnable defenses. Although the British had left Boston, most of the fleet remained just off the coast, waiting for favorable winds. Admiral Sholden had sent messenger ships to London to inform the Ministry of the Evacuation and to other colonies, so they could warn British ships headed for Boston that they needed to head for Halifax instead. It would be another week and a half before the fleet finally got its favorable winds and sailed away. The Continental Congress praised Washington for his success in the siege of Boston, and it ordered a gold medal struck in his honor. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. For more context on the events discussed today, please check out episode 86 of the American Revolution podcast, which you can access at blog.amrevpodcast.com. You can also subscribe for free on whatever podcast platform you like to listen to all of the episodes. But thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.